What you've built isn't the problem. You've spent the time, maybe even thousands of dollars. The service is done, the program exists, the book is written. Maybe the event still lives in your head, but it's sitting, waiting, because no one helped you plan what comes next. Not because you're unclear, but because you haven't had the space to design for what that work needs in order to grow. This episode is a debrief, the final in our Built to Move series. Episode 66 gave you structure. Episode 67 helped you name alignment. And today we close the loop. If your ideas move faster than your systems, or you've built something incredible but still feel blocked when it comes to operations, sales, or structure, this episode is for you. We're talking about design, the architecture that allows your work to be distributed, experienced, and sustained across time. You'll hear what it sounds like when you build with purpose, when your work is positioned to move, and when your strategy actually supports your capacity. I'll walk you through two case studies briefly from inside my own ecosystem: Strategic Edge Power Moves for Businesses and Nonprofits magazine and National Black Girl Month. You'll walk away knowing how to shift out of reactive decision making and into strategic design that sustains your vision and fuels continuous growth. Because here's what's true: growth doesn't happen accidentally, it happens by design. Let's go. Welcome to Impact Innovators with Felicia Ford, where we dive into the strategies that empower changemaker brands to leave a lasting legacy. Think of this podcast as your audio playbook for meaningful action. What's possible when thought leaders, disruptors, and pioneers align to share their journeys? I'm Felicia Ford, your host, bringing together the brightest minds and the most groundbreaking ideas to help you drive change, navigate through the sticky stuff, and elevate your brand. Whether you're tackling funding hurdles, looking for growth strategies, or seeking the perfect balance between profit and purpose, we've got you covered. Stay tuned and be a part of a movement that's setting new benchmarks in how we think about progress, community, and doing. Let's innovate, impact, and inspire. Now, you've likely heard me share before the term growth by design. If you've been with me over the last 10 plus years, you know that that has been a part of my terminology since the very beginning when I was the growth coach. But we're talking today about how design helps you to carry the work that you've already built. We're not talking about new things at this point, right? Because most of the change makers that I work with aren't struggling with what to build or what to create. They're really struggling with how to move what they've already created. We know that buyer behavior has changed, the world has changed, how we do business has changed. And if we're not adopting to these changes structurally or making adjustments to even the competition for our audience's attention, then things will change even more for us. I see it all the time. A 6 week series that created breakthroughs, but it wasn't documented in a way that could be delivered again, or that people who need to know what that transformation was like can read about it or see it or hear it, or a service that reached 20% of the people that it could have or should have because the structure to support it came too late. If you are having an event in July, now is the time, it's May, by the way. Now is the time that you want to be shouting from the rooftops about your event, because an event needs promotion, a book needs promotion, a program needs promotion, right? So, an event that needs promotion, a book that you're releasing, a program that you need new people in, or even a movement that you need more partners in. That's where this design steps in. It's the moment that you start asking, hmm, what infrastructure does this need in order to work? That's my goal for you today, is to consider that question. You can't deliver everything live. You're one person, you have one team, and there's only so many presentations you can collectively show up to during the week. But growth by design gives your product, service, book, program the rhythm, the lead time, the follow through that it needs to move in your absence. And that doesn't mean that you're completely disconnected, but it means that you don't have to be involved in every part of this process. Because when you're serving in the field, right, running an office or even leading a community, it only makes sense that you plan for things and that you plan for all of the things. Design gives you that space back. It lets you breathe, it lets your work breathe, it lets you reach, and it lets you be able to sit back and see the return of your investments. And that's what we're building towards. And that's what this episode is really about. The change makers who sustain impact over decades understand something extremely crucial, and that is creating and growing successfully require two completely different skill sets. But we're going to talk more about that. And I'm going to share some examples about this as a system. And that's a little bit of what we talked about in episode 66. But stick with me here, okay? Because you're brilliant at solving problems. And your instinct might be to create something new for the next challenge. And I'm chuckling because I sometimes do that. And that's why I have an idea journal, right? But what if the solution was, instead of creating more, to designing better? Growth by design begins with recognizing that your best work emerges from this extreme clarity layered with strategic thinking. And this is where you need your brain food. This is where you lay everything out on the table. You park here, you put your partner over there, you bring in some other creative folks, and you just sit there and you brainstorm, right? You're asking about, how is this going to create measurable outcomes? What systems need to exist for this to be delivered? And how does this build momentum? How does it connect the people? How do we follow up at this process? We're thinking about and talking about what a customer journey looks like. That all fits into the design of what you're creating. Now, I've never shared this story publicly, and I'll only share a snippet for the sake of brevity. Since we're talking about growth by design, it only makes sense to share this. And again, very briefly. So, the Golden Hour edition of Strategic Edge, Power Moves for Businesses and Nonprofits, my magazine, everyone sees the magazine. People even now are still purchasing hard copies. People are still accessing their digital versions. I was at a restaurant last week and I showed someone and they were like, oh my gosh, can I have this copy? So I started my plan in July of 2024 for what would happen in November of 2024. And with this single post on Threads, I had no idea it was going to have the type of reaction that it did, but it was something like 17,000 views and almost 500 comments. And there were hundreds of people who expressed interest in being featured in the magazine. I personally went through them all because I would be the one interviewing them. And I made sure that we were brand aligned and all of those extra details. But I selected those who wanted to be in the edition. And then even then, some people didn't make it to their actual interviews, but it was a designed experience. And I've never walked people through how this worked. But again, since we're here, I'm going to share that. So I batch recorded all of the episodes. And as I completed the interviews, I started thinking about placement and design of the actual pages. I knew that I envisioned a certain look, a certain feel, and that's just a part of my creative process. I was going to bring someone in to design this year, but I ended up having to do it myself because that didn't work out. And that was mid project. And so I regrouped with my team. And I just have to say a public thank you because she was sitting in my dining room. I was here in my office and we got through it. Okay. But I still, needed to do my final edits and that took a while. It took a lot of time, but I was down to the wire and it was out there and it's great. There's 18 business owners that are featured and then there's additional business owners that contributed, but each of them is a part of an ecosystem. Geographically, We are all in different parts of the world, different parts of the states. We only have states based people this year, but all of them are change makers in their own industries. So I built guest systems, I built editorial workflows. There was a photo curation process. There are feedback loops. There are research sections that can help you find conferences for specifically for Black people. I mean, there's so many resources because this edition was specifically for Black brands and Black owned businesses. But every feature in the magazine ties directly to the podcast because it was a double feature. And those episodes ran from episode 38 through 56. And there are strategies, there are resources for change makers. And some of it is specifically for holiday. Out of the 102 pages, probably 3 of them are holiday related, maybe 4. But then there's 100 more pages or 90 plus, 95 plus more pages that is evergreen. It's more like a guide than it is just a magazine. And why does that matter? Because many of you are also producing this incredible work, but you're launching it without a long view or you're in creator mode. And that's okay because you're a visionary founder, CEO. You're not the growth strategist. I am. And your excitement for what you're building or doing is operating in a silo. I love that your team is excited about it. But does everyone else see that? Right. And I've used this framework. The examples I'm sharing with you today are digitally based or online based, but these are the same frameworks that I've used in person in communities for at least 2 decades, right? At retreats, at events, for programs, there's some adaptation required, obviously, for what I have to do digitally. And that in and of itself is a new adventure for me, but the foundation remains the same. So with these assets, was it exciting for me? Absolutely. To create and to produce this evergreen resource for myself, but also for my clients, because that's how Strategic Edge was birthed. But then also for the people that are included in it, right? They now have assets to add to their EPK and whatever they're sharing with their community and showcasing who they are, what they do, and how they serve. Design was how I carried that. And that work is still active. The episodes are still circulating. People are still listening to them. The magazine is still doing its job. And that, my friend, was a strategic decision. So when you're a visionary creative, you surround yourself with people highly skilled at implementation and all the other parts that are necessary to carry your work forward and making sure that your clients have access and that your referral sources have access and that people are seeing what you're doing and hearing what you're doing. So when you think of your client's journey, I mentioned that term earlier, that's that space between how people find out about who you are and then them coming to you to become a client or to become a sponsor or to become a donor or to become a volunteer. You're not personally handling all of that. Depending on what type of business you have, you typically aren't personally handling all of that. And here again is why, or where I would say growth by design comes in. Design in this sense is when you're creating the processes and the systems that can be repeated. And again, that's a recall from episode 66, but you identify the core components that should be consistent for this to happen again the same way that you delivered it. One of my friends owns a juice bar, and since I've known her, it's been 10 years now. She has always made my particular juice the way that I love it. And I love that she does that. And I know 8, 9 years ago, I'm sure, I shared with her, hey, you really want to focus on training and creating a recipe book so that you're not always the person behind the counter, right? That's an example of this, but I won't go too deep in there because I want to tell you quickly about National Black Girl Month, the campaign from behind the scenes. So, of course, as we've been talking about it for the last 7, 8 weeks now, but it launched in April of 2025 for this year. This was our second year. And of course, since our inaugural year last year, we've been planning for 2025 since quarter 3 of 2024. And you best believe we have already started planning for 2026. Okay. But last year we pulled the data, we created new resources, just a few tweaks, not a lot, based on what Black women actually needed for this season. So everything that we do for that campaign is grounded in community. And this year's theme was Black motherhood. And so everything that we did was reflected in that, even if you're not a mother. But we stuck with our same format with the toolkit as our centerpiece. And then we increased opportunities for community engagement. And I won't go into all of the details, but we increase ways for Black women to connect. We increase ways for them to feel heard, seen, acknowledged, and allow them to express themselves. That part didn't need to be on public display. Our goal was met, right? we invited several incredible, amazing, just incredibly smart and passionate and compassionate women from across the country. And I just realized, so we're officially international because Dr. Phoebe Ajayi joined us from the UK. And you can listen to all of those episodes. That would be episodes 57 through 65 for National Black Girl Month. And Dr. Phoebe also sent us a video, and that's on the National Black Girl Month YouTube channel. But my point is that planning for this started, and to be completely transparent, friends, I actually started planning for 2026 in March of 2025 because as I was creating, I had some other ideas. And so I just put that all over in a corner, right? But design allows you to do this. When your programs operate from this foundation, growth becomes refinement rather than reinvention, because then your energy goes towards improvement instead of recreation. That's exhausting. You don't want to keep this redoing and recreating, but your team then can develop expertise rather than constantly learning new approaches. And I just want to say that I have to give so much appreciation and thanks for everyone who shared about National Black Girl Month. All of our guests were incredible. I've thanked them several times, and I'm still in awe of what that entire experience was like. I mean, I even listened to the episodes as if I wasn't there interviewing them, and it's an amazing experience. So the final leg of this, my friends, is that design is the entry point. The work you do builds community, whether that's an explicit goal or a natural byproduct of what you've created. Paying attention to how community naturally forms around your work, and then creating structure that supports those organic patterns, you're then observing where it emerges, and then you can design systems that help it flourish. That is what I like to call a power move. So I would like for you to ask yourself, if what you're creating and what you've created needed to last more than 5 years, what would you do differently right now? What would you document? What would you delegate? What might you restructure? Not later, but right now, this quarter, right? We're at the end of month 2 of Q2 for the year. That's what we build on. And so if you're ready to stop cycling through what it looks like to say, I've got this great thing, but it's too late, or I don't have time. If you want to start leading from structure, I invite you to apply to work with me. Head over to media.feliciafordandco.com, select work with us, and you can see the link there to submit your application. Because growth by design isn't about adding more. It's about making what you've already built sustainable, effective, and clear. That's how you build to move. Now, give it what it needs, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey, Changemaker, real quick before you go, if today's episode helped you in some way, the best way to thank me is to head over to Apple Podcasts, subscribe to the channel, and leave a review. I'd also love to connect with you over on social. You can find me at Friends Call Me Fee. Until next time, keep changing the game.